Hello everyone, we would want to talk to you about learning modality transition. This covers face-to-face classes, hybrid or high-flex, and etc.
Let's begin by talking about the basic overview of the topic. As a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, the Philippines' education problems have gotten worse. To address them, the Department of Education, which is DepEd, has used distance learning techniques. This consists of online courses and modular education. Although many students and teachers choose in-person learning, they must adjust to online learning and other forms of alternative education. Fortunately, schools in the Philippines have returned to face-to-face classes after 2 years of implementing distance learning due to the pandemic. Starting November 2, 2022, all public schools across the country will be mandated to implement 5 days of in-person classes according to DepEd, while private schools will be allowed to continue implementing blended learning or full distance learning.
Let us now talk about some statistics. Face-to-face classes in low-risk areas of COVID have been approved by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, according to the Department of Education, for September 20th of 2021. There were at least 100 public schools and 20 private schools which were permitted to pilot. Before conducting the pilot, DepEd conducts safety assessments in accordance with the criteria given by DOH or the Department of Health. Classes will be held face-to-face and via distance learning for 2 months. According to recent news, preparations for the nationwide reopening of schools began in August of 2022. Only 6 million out of 27 million students in primary and secondary schools have returned to class. And lastly, for the statistics part, the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication program joined forces with the government in preparing for the resume of face-to-face classes. Together, they will be helping in creating an environment where everyone will be safe from COVID when the on-site learning resumes.
Let's now discuss why we chose this particular topic. We chose this topic because we wanted to share our thoughts and experiences with the new normal as students who had experienced the blended learning modality in the Philippines and the transition from blended to hybrid learning. This issue demonstrates the various perspectives on the pandemic that the students experienced, as well as the adjustments we made to prepare for the transition to hybrid face-to-face learning. We use this opportunity to discuss our difficulties, privileges, and breakthroughs as we adapted to the many learning modality the government had given to the students of the Philippines.
In the following part, we will talk about what we find interesting about the topic. The interesting part of the topic is how relevant it is for students to experience the transition from distance learning to limited face-to-face classes. Until now, some schools and universities have implemented their full on-site classes, such as UP Diliman, DLSU, FEU, and more. At the same time, others are on the hybrid of learning, namely UST, Our Lady of Fatima University, Mapua University, etc. Understanding the changes to the modes of learning can lead to student academic improvement.
We will now discuss our thoughts on the government's action on the learning modalities. During the previous administration, all classes were held online or in modules. Students found it difficult to learn during online classes because there are so many distractions around us. Teachers were having difficulty determining whether their students are truly learning. However, various types of learning modalities are now available during the new administration. Schools can now choose between 3 modes of instruction: in-person classes, blended learning, or full distance learning. They left it up to each school to decide which mode of learning will be used for the upcoming school year. However, public schools are required to make the transition to face-to-face classes. With the government's decision, students now have the opportunity to learn knowledge and skills in an effective manner using the new learning modalities.
Let us now talk about how it affected us and our families. Their perspectives on the issue will also be discussed. Starting with how it affected us. Learning modality transition affects us in a way when we see our friends or other students struggling with this new normal setup, since not all can afford the time, the money, and the effort to go to school and go back to an online setup the next day. It depends on the schedule, but it affects the students' performance. This hybrid or limited face-to-face does not exceed the students' motivation to learn. It could hinder their skills in adapting to such surroundings or their skills in learning. It depends on how the school handles hybrid learning for their students, since some schools take into account what their students need or what makes them motivated to learn. And this is also a way for schools to ready themselves with the facilities, teachers, and resources to implement a full face-to-face mode of learning. We can say that this learning setup has its pros and cons, and since what was said is based solely on what we saw either on the news or what we and our families observed on this issue, we can say that this hybrid learning is costly and timely. But it is also a way to slowly go back to full face-to-face learning.
For the last part of our presentation, we will be discussing the actions or measures we can do to make others understand and help address the issue that will be based from the Philippine Department of Education. They approved the expansion phase of face-to-face classes for both public and private schools. This follows the President's approval of the recommendation for progressive expansion on the implementation of a proposal by the National Education Council, NEC, set up last year. The main protocols and standards will continue to be applicable as needed, with the following main parameters for inclusion. 1. Expansion schools have been validated as meeting the School Safety Assessment 2 standards. 2. Schools must be located in areas with alert levels 1 and 2 based on the Department of Health's periodic risk assessment. 3. Based on school capacity, schools may already include other grade levels. 4. Schools or divisions must have obtained the approval of the local chief executive in the city or municipality where the expansion school is located, as well as proper coordination with respective barangay officials. 5. Students taking face-to-face classes must have their parents' written permission. 6. Schools are allowed to have more contact time for teaching and learning as long as meals are not consumed in school except during managed recess. 7. Only vaccinated teachers are permitted to participate in face-to-face classes, and vaccinated students are preferred. More than 6,700 schools nationwide have passed the SSAT, with 6,586 being public schools and 100 being private schools. This list will grow as the remaining schools are able to close their respective SSAT gaps. Lastly, it follows the Department of Education's directive for readiness assessments in all schools during the pilot implementation period.
Our presentation has come to an end. Thank you for listening. We hope you learned something from us.